Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Dirshu Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. We're going to be learning today Mirtz Hashem Daf Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph and Kuf Yud Tes Amud Beis. I'd like to try to pick up another day on the Dirshu schedule. So we begin today on Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph. We begin a brand new Siman. We're continuing, of course, to learn Hilchas Yom Tov. Siman Tov Kuf Hey. Din HaChaylev Behema B'Yom Tov. The halacha of one who wishes to milk an animal on Yom Tov, ubay sif echad, and here we have one sif in the entire siman. Before we even begin to read the mechaber, let's go down to the Mishnah Berurah, and the Mishnah Berurah has a hakdama. He has a little bit of an introduction to this siman. So let's go to the first line of the Mishnah Berurah here on Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph. Says the Chavetz Chaim. Akdim lozeh hasimin hakdama kitzara. I'm going to give a short introduction to this siman, says the Chavetz Chaim. Vehi, and this is the introduction, and this introduction is going to lay out for us very succinctly the rules that govern the halachas of this siman. Says the Chavetz Chaim. Asar lachloiv behema she'imedes lachaliva oil legadol vladois b'yom tov. It is forbidden for one to milk an animal that is being kept for milking purposes. So if you have a dairy cow, you're not allowed to milk a dairy cow on Yom Tov, or if you're keeping an animal for breeding purposes. But in both of these cases, this animal is not being kept for food. You're not keeping this behemoth for shechita. You're not keeping it to slaughter it, to eat it. You're either keeping it as a dairy cow or as a breeding cow. In both of those cases, you are not allowed to milk that animal. Afilu daitoi lechol miyad, even if you have in mind that you want to milk the milk and drink it right away. Mishum mefarek dehu tailada dedash. The problem over here is the isser of mefarek. The isser of mefarek is the isser of extracting a meichel, extracting a food from something that it is enveloped in. And this is a tailada of the av malacha of dash, of threshing. We know that when we have grain, we have a kernel of grain that is held inside the chaff. And what you need to do is you need to extract the grain from the chaff. That's the process of threshing. Mefarek is a tailada of dash. Mefarek is anytime you extract a meichel, a food item, from something that it is encased in, that is a tailada of dash. Now, over here, what are you doing? You're milking a cow. Now, what is this cow? What's the status of the cow? Well, if the cow is a dairy cow, or if the cow is a breeding cow, then the cow does not constitute a meichel, even though it's true that technically speaking, the cow could be slaughtered and eaten. However, since this cow belongs to a yid, and that yid's das, his intent is that he's keeping this cow as a dairy cow or as a breeding cow, this cow is no longer categorized as oichel. This cow is now categorized as psoilus. Now, psoilus means something inferior. Now, we're not saying that the cow is an inferior cow because it's a dairy cow or because it's a breeding cow. But what we are saying is that in the context of a meichel, we now have two separate entities here. We have the milk, which is a meichel, and we have the cow, which is not a meichel. So, klape, the milk, in contrast to the milk, the cow is considered psoilus. So what you're doing over here when you milk the cow is you're extracting a meichel from a non-meichel that the meichel is encased in. The milk, which is a meichel, is encased in the non-meichel cow. And that would be the isser of mefarek. And the Chavetz Chaim explains this very well. Since this dairy cow or this breeding cow is not oimid la'achila, it's not there for eating purposes, yesh aleha shem psoilus. In contrast to the milk, which is a meichel, the cow is considered psoilus. It's considered something inferior, meaning that it is not a meichel. V'daima l'dash, and therefore the milking process would be similar to threshing. Shamafred atua mikashin shala. When you thresh, when you do dash, what you're doing is you're separating the tfuah, you're extracting the grain from the chaff that surrounds it. Okay, so we have now established the first potential problem with milking. If you have a para that's a medes lechaliva, if you have a dairy cow, or legadol vlados, or a breeding cow. So then if you were to milk the cow on Yom Tov, you would be doing the malacha of mefarek. Okay, says the Chavetz Chaim, ubazeh, in this case of the cow that's oimid lechaliva or oimid legadol vlados, ein chilik beinim chaylev oisal l'saych kli sheyesh ba'achlin. There's no difference. It's irrelevant whether when you milk the cow, you milk it into a bucket that has food items in it, or you're milking the animal into a bucket that is empty. Why? Because over here, the problem is a mefarek problem. And mefarek, it's totally irrelevant to the isser of mefarek, what you're milking the cow into. We're going to see that there are other potential problems with milking the cow. And those problems can be mitigated by milking the cow into a bucket that has food in it, but not so the malacha of mefarek. So if you're milking a cow that's a dairy cow or a breeding cow, you have a mefarek problem. So you're not allowed to milk the cow no matter what kind of bucket you milk the cow into. Avo, however, im hi omedes la'achila, let's say you have a cow that's not a dairy cow, not a breeding cow. This is a cow that's omedes la'achila, tahainu l'shachta, meaning that this is an animal that you're maintaining because you intend on slaughtering it and eating it. Eino lehoshem psoilus. Then we're not going to call the cow psoilus. Then the cow is a meichel. Vein doimeladosh, the kula oichelhi. Now the activity of milking is not mefarek. It's not similar to dush. You're not extracting a food item from a non-food item. If this cow is a medes l'shchita, so then this cow is a meichel. Then when you milk it, you're extracting a meichel from a meichel. That's not the malacha of dash. So in the case of a cow that's a medes l'shchita, we don't have a mefarek problem. So then what's the potential problem? Valkain, since you don't have a mefarek problem, so now it depends. If you milk the cow into a bucket that has food in it, shari, then it's mutter. Why is it mutter? The mashke habala oichel ka'oichel, because the milk, which is a mashke, the milk which is a beverage, when you milk it into a bucket that has food, so right away you're milking it straight into the food. And as the mechaber is going to speak out, by milking it into the food, we're talking about a case where you want the milk as part of the food. Let's say you have some kind of dish inside this bucket that's made out of breadcrumbs and it needs milk added to it. Let's say it's some kind of a cereal. So you want to add milk into this prepared dish, and in the end it's going to be a meichel, not a mashke. Well, in that case, what are you doing here? When you milk the cow is a meichel. You're taking the milk and you're milking it straight into a bucket that has a meichel in it. So it's a meichel and a meichel. If you milk directly into a bucket that has food items in it, that milking is mutter. Because the beverage that immediately becomes part of a meichel in the bucket has the status of a meichel. The heavy kemafrid oichel me'oichel. So what are you doing? You have a cow which is a meichel, and you're extracting milk from it, but that milk that you're extracting is not a mashke. You might look at it, you might say, I'm extracting a mashke from a meichel. That could be a potential problem. But that's not what you're doing. What you're doing is you're extracting a meichel from a meichel. Because since the milk is going immediately into the breadcrumbs and it's becoming a meichel immediately, we don't look at it that you're extracting a mashke from a meichel. We look at it that you're extracting a meichel from a meichel, and that's mutter. Aval, however, im chaylev l'saych kli reik, if you are to milk this cow that's a medes l'shchita, so it has the halacha of a meichel. If you milk this cow into an empty bucket, gam bazeh aser hachalav, now that milk is going to be aser. Why? Mishum noilad. Now that milk is going to be considered noilad. Why is it noilad? Demeikara oichel, because while the milk was part of the cow, it was a meichel, because this cow was a meichel. It's a medes l'shchita. V'hashta mashke. And now when you milk the cow and you extract the chalav, which is a mashke, you're putting it into an empty bucket, so it remains a mashke. Now, before you had a meichel, now you have a mashke. So this mashke became a mashke on Yom Tov. That's noilad. So far we had over here two potential problems. We have, you're not allowed to milk a dairy cow or a breeding cow, because if you do so, you're performing the malacha of mefarik. If you have a cow that's a medes l'shchita, so then it depends. You want to milk it into a bucket that has food in it, that's no problem, because the cow is considered a meichel. You're extracting a meichel from a meichel. There's no isser of mefarik, and there's no noilud, because the milk was a meichel when it was part of the meichel cow, and it is a meichel now when it goes into the bucket, into the food that's in the bucket. You want to milk the cow into an empty bucket, you have a problem. We're not going to say, according to most Rishonim, you don't have a problem of mefarik, but the milk is going to be muktzah because of noilud. Because before the milking, the milk was a meichel, it was part of the meichel cow, and now when you milk it, it becomes a mashke, so that's a noilud problem. Vedas hagra, however, you should know that it's the opinion of the gra, the gam bozeh, that even in this case, where you milk the cow that's oimedes l'shchita into an empty bucket, so we said the isser is because of noilad. According to the gra, ikara isser mishum mefarek, that would still be the isser of mefarek, keven denase mashke, because by extracting a mashke from a meichel, the gra holds that is a problem of mefarek. Zui das Shulchan Aruch. This is the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. However, the Chavetz Chaim does mention here, and he's going to make mention of it again soon. The yesh min rishonim, there are those rishonim. He brings this down from the Bach. The yesh min rishonim shesoivrin da'afilu behema ha'imedes lachalava, that even a dairy cow, mutter lachlei v'isal l'soich hakadera sheyesh ba'achlin, the Bach holds that you are allowed to milk a dairy cow into a bucket that has food in it, and he holds that there's no isser of mefarik over here. And if you take a look in the very lengthy Sharat Tzion in here, Kat and Gimel, it seems that the Bach holds that this is mutter l'tzarech oichel nefesh, and it's not a problem. V'yispar l'kamei, and the Chavetz Chaim says, I'm going to mention this further on in Sif Kat and Dalet. Okay, so based on this Hakdama, let's take a look at the words of the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Behema shehi medes la'achila. If you have a cow or any kind of other animal that gives milk, doesn't have to be a cow, could be a goat. If you have a behema that's a medes la'achila, that means that you're maintaining this animal and you intend one day on slaughtering it and eating it. So this cow is a meichel. This animal is a meichel. Behema shehi medes la'achila. V'roitza lachloi v'isa le'echel hachalav. And now you want to milk it on Yom Tov so that you could drink, you could consume the milk. So it depends. If you want to go ahead and you want to milk it into an empty bucket, asr, that's asr. And as we explained in the Hakdama, the reason it's asr is because of noilad. While the milk was still inside the udder of the animal, it was part of a meichel, so it was considered a meichel. Now when you milk it, it becomes a mashke. So it became a mashke on Yom Tov. This is also because of noilad. However, if you milk the animal into a bucket that has food in it, mutter, that's mutter, because now there's no noilad problem. And again, there's no mefarik problem because you're extracting a meichel from a meichel, so you don't have a mefarik problem, and you don't have a noilad problem because while the milk was in the udder of the animal, it was a meichel. It was part of the animal, which is a meichel. And now when it went into the bucket and it became once again a meichel because you milked it straight into a food item, so it became a meichel, so there's no noilad. It was a meichel and it is a meichel. And now the Mechaber explains this. He says, what kind of case are we talking about where it's mutter if you milk it into a bucket that has a food item in it, and therefore there's no noilad because it was a meichel, and it is again a meichel after you milk it, and the milk is not considered a mashke? When is that true? That's true, for example, in a case where you need the milk in order to be misakein, to prepare the food dish that's in the bucket. So like the Mishnah Berurah is going to give a case. He says, let's say you have in there pirurim, you have crumbs in there, and you want to make some kind of a cereal or some kind of a porridge. out of this. So you have the dry ingredients are in the bucket, and now you're milking the milk straight into the dry ingredients. So it's never a mashke. You're milking the milk straight into the cereal, and the end result, the end item, is a Michael. So there's no noilad. It was a Michael, and it is a Michael. So like the Mechaber says, this is true if you need the milk in order to prepare the Michael. Or sheyesh ba pirurin, or you have crumbs in there, and it's not so much that you're preparing a moist cereal. The hechalav nivla behem. The milk is actually going to vanish. The milk is going to become absorbed in the crumbs that are in the bucket. So again, it's never a mashke. Immediately upon the milking, it becomes a Michael. Aval, however, hachaylev kol tzainai, if somebody wants to be a wise guy, and he has a whole flock, he has a flock of goats that could be milked. He has a flock, you wouldn't call it a flock, you'd call it a herd of cows that could be milked. So he wants to be a wise guy. He says, hey, well, I was in the Dirshu shir, and I learned Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph, and I learned over there that if you milk the animal into a bucket that has food in it, it's okay. So he takes a slice of bread and he puts it into the bottom of the bucket, and now he wants to go ahead, or a vat, not a bucket. He wants to go ahead and milk 25 animals. That slice of bread is not going to be matir milking 25 animals, because the milk that you milk is going to be a beverage. At the end of the day, you're going to have a vat full of milk. You're not going to have a vat full of a Michael. It's not going to, the end item is not going to be a Michael, it's going to be a mashke. So that's why the Mechaber says, somebody who wants to go ahead and milk his whole flock or his whole herd, that's not going to become mutter because of one slice of bread that you put into a bucket. Okay, that was the Mechaber. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Aleph. Oimedes la'achila. And the Mechaber is addressing the case over here of a cow or an animal that's a medes l'shchita. It's something that you're maintaining one day to slaughter and eat, and therefore it has the halachic status of a Michael. That's when it's true what the Mechaber said over here, that if you're going to milk it into a bucket that has food in it, it's mutter, because there's no mefarik and there's no noilot. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, but if you're dealing with a dairy cow or a breeding cow, then you're not allowed to milk it, even if you milk it into a bucket that has food in it, like we explained above in the Hakdama, because then you would be over on the malacha of mefarik, because then you have an animal which is not a Michael, it's not a food item, and you're extracting the milk from the food item. That would be the malacha of mefarik. Not only that, says the Chavetz Chaim, if you're dealing with a dairy cow or a breeding cow, even if you have milk that dripped out of the udder of the cow on its own, you didn't milk it, so you weren't over on the malacha of mefarik, some milk dripped out of the udder. Are you allowed to use that milk? Says the Chavetz Chaim, no, aser mishum noilad. That would be aser mishum noilad. What's the noilad over here? The noilad over here was you didn't have milk. Before you had a cow, you didn't have milk. Now you have milk. Now you have a beverage. Now it's true that this breeding cow or this dairy cow, right? It's not a shchita cow, so it's not a Michael, so it's not noilad like we explained before, that before you had a Michael and now you have a mashke. It's a different noilad. Before you had cow, it wasn't a Michael, but it wasn't a mashke either. Now you have milk. That's noilad. So you're not allowed, that milk would be muktzah. Ice cotton base. The Mechaber said you want to milk this cow on Yom Tov le'echal hechalav in order to consume the milk. Ritzayna loymar boy bayoim. Realize that whatever heter the Mechaber says over here, that there is to milk an animal on Yom Tov, right? Like if you're going to milk it into a bucket that has food in it, that's only loymar boy bayoim. That's only if you're going to milk it so that you should consume the milk on that day of Yom Tov. If you're trying to milk a cow on Yom Tov so that you could consume the milk on the next day, that would always be aser. Even if you're milking the cow into an empty bucket, you're only allowed to do hachana for tzarech eichel nefesh for today. We learned before you're not allowed to do hachana from one day of Yom Tov to the next. You're certainly not allowed to do hachana from Yom Tov to Chol. So the whole heter over here to milk a cow, if you're milking it into an empty bucket, that's of course only if you're going to consume the milk today. So the tircha that you're doing is tzarech eichel nefesh for tzarech hayoim, for today. Ice cotton gimel. So the Mechaber said whether or not it's going to be permissible to milk the cow is going to depend. Im likidera she'ein ba'achlin, the Mechaber said, if you're milking it into an empty bucket, then it's going to be aser. Explains the Mishnah Berurah here. Hainu after daitoi litein achar kach echolav l'soich oichel. This is true even if your intent is you're making a porridge in the kitchen and you need milk for the porridge. So you take an empty bucket out to the stall and you want to go milk the animal, get the milk in the bucket, immediately bring the bucket into the kitchen and pour the milk over into the porridge. So it's going to become a meichel. It's still aser, because the bottom line is when you milk the cow into the bucket, you have a noilot problem. You had a meichel, and now you milked the milk into the bucket, and now you have a bucket full of a mashke. You have a bucket full of chalav. That's a noilot problem. So even though you're immediately going to pour it over into a porridge, that doesn't help. Even though you want to do this immediately, since right now when you milk the animal, you don't have a meichel in the bucket, so you milk the animal into the bucket, you have a beverage. You have a bucket full of a beverage. And right now you have a noilot problem. When the milk was still in the udder of the animal, that cholav was considered an oichel, just like the rest of the animal. The whole animal was halachically considered a meichel because it's an animal that's a medes l'shita. So this animal was halachically considered a meichel. Now when you milk the milk into the empty bucket, you have a mashke, you have a beverage, you have a bucket full of milk, noilad. V'hashta mashke. Now it's a mashke. That's noilad. However, the Mechaber said, if you're going to milk it into a bucket that has food in it, then ois cotton daladain it's mutter. Why is it mutter? The bazel loy heavy ala cholav shem noilad, because now there is no noilad problem. The yesh aleh shem oichel, because immediately upon the milking, the milk becomes a meichel. The yesh aleh shem oichel. We halachically consider this milk to be a meichel. Kevin the bala oichel. Because immediately from the cow straight away into the bucket, it's combining with the meichel that's in the bucket, and it is immediately becoming a meichel. So there's no loilad. Umeikar gam ken oichel. And before you milked it, it was also an oichel. Because while it was in the udder, it was part of the cow, and the cow is halachically a meichel. Veda, however, you should know, says the Chavetz Chaim, the Yeshmin HaRishonim, there are those Rishonim, and again, this would be, I think, the Bach that he mentioned before in the Sharetzian and Ois Gimel, and we mentioned this above in the Hakdama. Vedan, you should know the Yeshmin HaRishonim, there are those Rishonim Shemakilin that rule leniently, Afilu b'vehema ha'imedes lachaliva, even when we're dealing with a dairy cow, oil gadol vlodos, or we're dealing with a breeding cow, and they hold that even a breeding cow, even a dairy cow, you're allowed to milk it into a bucket that has food in it. You're not allowed to milk it into a bucket that's empty, because then you have a noilad problem. But you're allowed to milk it into a bucket that has food in it, because there's no noilad problem. Somehow it was a meichel, and it is a meichel. Why was it a meichel? There's no noilad problem. They hold that there's no noilad problem. They hold that there's no noilad problem. 1 second. V'dad yesh ben Rishonim shemakilin afilu b'behema ha'imedes lachaliva oil gadol v'ladois. Because it's not a mashke. Since you're milking it, right? There's no mefarek problem. There's no mefarek. They hold that there's no problem of mefarek because they hold that it's mutter l'tzarech echel nefesh. The Bach holds that the mefarek is mutter l'tzarech echel nefesh. So what is it? So you're extracting a meichel from an animal, and the mefarek is mutter, and al snoilad Als noilad, they hold it's not noilad. Why isn't it noilad? Why isn't it? I have to take a look at this and see why it's not noilad. I tackled this when I was preparing, but it escaped me. Why isn't it noilad according to these Rishonim? Mm-hmm. What I'm thinking is that the reason it's not noilad is because since the Rishonim hold that there's no problem of mefarik, we're dealing over here with an animal that's oimid l'chaliva. So these Rishonim hold that even by a behema ha'imedas l'chaliva, there is no mefarik issue because they hold that the mefarik over here is mutter l'tzarech eichel nefesh on Yom Tov, and therefore, even though it's a behema, it's a behema ha'imedas l'chaliva, so the milk, when it's in the udder, it's not a meichel because this cow is not a meichel cow. This cow is a cow that's a medas l'chaliva. It's a dairy cow. So the milk, when it's in the udder, what's the status of the milk when it's in the udder? You're not going to give it the status of a meichel because the cow is not a meichel. When do we have a noilad problem? When the cow is a medas l'shchita, so then the whole cow is considered to be a meichel. Then when you extract the milk, there's a noilad problem because before it was a meichel, now it's a mashke. But if it's a behema that's a medas l'chaliva, if it's a dairy cow, so then the cow itself doesn't have a status of a meichel, so you're not changing a meichel into a mashke. So what are you doing? You might say that there's a noilad problem because before there was no mashke and now there is a mashke. That's not true. The mashke was there when it was in the udder of the animal. It was considered a mashke. Remember, this is a dairy cow. So the das of the owner was on that milk. Since there's no mefarik problem, he knows that he can milk the cow on Yom Tov. So there's a mashke in there, and it's a mashke that's eminently available on Yom Tov because there's no mefarik problem according to these Rishonim. So then there's no noilad problem either. That, I believe, is the answer. Okay. Continues the Mishnah Berurah here in Ois Katan Daled. V'nireh de b'mokem menias simchas Yom Tov, says the Chavetz Chaim, certainly if you're talking about a case where there would be a menias simchas Yom Tov, where it would directly take away from simchas Yom Tov if you do not milk the animal. For example, she'ein loy ma yoichal kiyem ma'achol echolav, if somebody doesn't have anything to eat, the only thing he can eat on Yom Tov is a milcha gemil, and he needs milk, yesh lismach al zeh lahakel, you could be makel and follow this opinion that these Rishonim, this Bach, that says that even an animal that's a medas l'chaliva, there's no mefarik problem and there's no noilad problem if you're going to milk it. If you're going to milk it into a k'dera sheyesh by oichlin. So I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. Again, these Rishonim are mekel. If you go back, v'dad yeshman Rishonim shemakilin afilu bebehema ha'medas l'chaliva. They hold that you're allowed to milk it into a k'dera sheyesh by oichlin. You still would not be allowed to milk it into a k'dera, into an empty k'dera. All right, I have to. Yeah, it's only mutter to milk it into a k'dera sheyesh by oichlin. So I think this whole speech that I gave is not really accurate. There's no noilad problem. There's no noilad problem if you're milking it into a k'dera sheyesh by oichlin. But if you're milking it into a k'dera, into an empty k'dera, if you're milking it into an empty bucket, so then even these Rishonim that hold as no mefarik, it seems it would still be usher because then there would be a noilad problem. Because now it's a mashke and before it was a meichel. So you understand what I'm saying? I just want to be clear here. If you go back to the Hakdama, if you go back to the Chavetz Chaim's Hakdama, he said near the end, by me it's 3 lines up from the end of the Mishnah Berurah's Hakdama, he said, "V'yesh min harishonim," there are those rishonim shesayvrim who hold ta'afilu behema ha'imedas lachalava, that even a dairy cow mutar lachla v'sal l'soicha gedera sheyesh ba oichlin. You're allowed to milk it into a bucket that has food in it. Now, why? Because these rishonim hold that there is no mefarik problem. They hold that even though you're talking about a dairy cow, we don't say that this is mefarik, that you're extracting a meichel from a non-meichel, and it's mefarik. Why? Because they hold that whatever mefarik there is over here, it's mutar l'tzarech eichel nefesh on Yom Tov. But the Mishnah Berurah is very clear over here that this is only mutar, over here in the Hakdama, it's only mutar according to these rishonim, if you're doing it l'sayich hakdera sheyesh ba'achlin, if you're milking it into a bucket that has food in it, so that there's no limud problem. But if you would milk it into a bucket that's empty, these rishonim would also hold that it's aser, because now there is a limud problem. Now, I'm not 100% clear on why that's so. In other words, before it was a cow, it's a dairy cow. Now you milk it into an empty bucket. Now you have milk in the bucket. Somehow that's a limud problem. But if you milk it into a food, now it's not a limud problem. I'm not 100% sure why it's not a limud problem. It could be the reason it's not a limud problem is because my das is on that milk. I don't know. I'm not sure. This is something I have to clarify. I want to go weiter because I want to try to pick up a day, like I said at the beginning of the shir. So I will try to clarify this and come back to you. In the meantime, let's go weiter. Okay. Ice cotton hay. The Mechaber explained that this is true, that you could milk a cow, you could milk an animal that's a medas la'achila, right? We're going back to those rishonim now. Now we're not going according to the Bach. We're going according to the Shita of the Mechaber. The Mechaber says you cannot milk a dairy cow, but if it's a cow that's a medas l'shchita, if it's a meichel cow, you're allowed to milk it into a bucket that has a meichel in the bucket. Why? Because there's no mefarik problem and there's no limud problem. Because immediately upon the milking, it goes into the food and it's a meichel. So there's no limud problem. And the Mechaber said, and we go to Ice Cotton Hay, this is true, Sheba HaCholov L'Saknoi, when the milk is going into the meichel in order to help prepare the meichel. Sheyesh Bagdera Kol Kach Ochlin, says the Chavetz Chaim, we're talking about a case where there's so much food in the bucket, Kefit Tzarech HaCholov L'Sikunoi, so that you're milking the appropriate amount of milk in order to prepare the meichel dish that's in the bucket. So in that case, you milk the milk from a cow, which is a medas l'shchita, so it's a meichel, and you milked it straight into a bucket, the appropriate amount of milk to prepare the meichel that's in the bucket, so it's meichel to meichel. There's no limud. Ayal kol panim, or at least sheroiv hachalav yeh nitzrach laha'eichel, or at least you're milking an amount of milk where the majority of it, the roiv of it, is needed to prepare the meichel that's inside the bucket. And based on that roiv will even be matir the rest of the milk that you're milking into the bucket that's not going to become part of the meichel. We're not going to say that extra milk is noiled now. Now it's a mashkin, it's noiled, it's aser. Since roiv of the milk is necessary for the meichel, we give all the milk a status of a meichel, and we say there's no noiled. Ice cotton vav, oishiyesh ba pirurin, or the Mechaber gave another case. You have breadcrumbs inside this bucket, and the milk is going to become absorbed. Hainunami shall kol panim roiv achalav nivla ba pirurin. The Mechaber means that in a case where at least the majority of the milk is going to become absorbed. Ice cotton zayin, but you can't use this trick to go milk your whole herd or your whole flock. You can't go ahead and say, I'm going to put one slice of bread in a vat, and based on that, I'm going to milk my whole herd. Milsa, the pshita nakat. The Chavetz Chaim says this is obvious. The Chavetz Chaim says the Mechaber didn't even have to say this. For Iker, the main point is the ein niter achalav al yidei ma'at lechem shenoiser betachtis akli. We're not going to be matir all the milk based on one slice of bread you put on the bottom of the vat. Kol kama de'ein roiv hachalav nivla boy, unless the majority of the milk that you're milking is going to become absorbed in the Michael. V'yesh limchais b'hamayim she'oivrin al zeh, and the Chavetz Chaim says that you should be moicha, you should protest against a lot of people who are over on this. They use a kunst, they throw in a little bit of bread into a gedera, into a bucket, and then they go milk as much as they want. Okay, now we go on Kuf Yud Tes Amud Beis on the top. Let's go to the Ramah. Tricky Ramah. Haga. Ve'ena Yehudi achaylev behema b'Yom Tov. Let's say a non-Jew milks an animal on Yom Tov. Now note that the Ramah doesn't say whose animal this is. So we're going to tackle this in the Mishnah Berurah. So the Ramah says you have a non-Jew, and he milked an animal on Yom Tov, v'Yisrael ro'ehu, and a Yisrael, a Yid, watched him do the milking. And the point over here is that there's no Chalav Yisrael problem. We know that you milk a cow, there has to be a Yid standing there watching the milking. Otherwise, it's Chalav Nachri. Chalav Nachri is Aser. Now, here in the United States, we have this creation of Rav Moshe's called Chalav Stam, where a Yid doesn't have to watch the milking. According to the Rishiva Zatzal, there's a Chumrah, Bal Nefesh should be Machbar on Chalav Yisrael, but Me'ikar Adin, a Yid doesn't have to watch the milking because we have the FDA and we have the Mirsis, we have the fear of the government. The law requires that the milk has to be 100% pure cow's milk, and it can't be any pig's milk, the donkey's milk from a behemoth Timea mixed in, so we could drink the milk without watching it. But anywhere else where you don't have this fear of the government, there has to be a Yid watching the milking, otherwise that milk is treif. It's Chalav Nachri. So that's why the Ramah points out, of course, if you have a non-Jew milking a cow, there has to be a case where a Yid watched the milking. So says the Ramah, Ve'ena Yehudi achaylu behema b'Yom Tov, if you have a non-Jew that milked an animal on Yom Tov, Yisrael ro'ehu, and the Yid watched the milking, yesh lahakol, you could be mekel, and you could drink that milk on Yom Tov. Let's take a look in the Mishnah Berurah here. Very tricky. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and ches. Ve'ena Yehudi hachaylev behema, a non-Jew who milked the behema. Well, exactly what's the case? Whose animal is it? And what kind of animal is it? Says the Mishnah Berurah, well, let's assume that it was a Yid's animal. So a non-Jew came and he milked the Yid's animal. What kind of animal? Hainu b'medes la'achila. It has to be that it was the Yid's animal that was a medes la'achila. It was there for shchita purposes. Why? Because if it was a Yid's animal and it was a medes la'chaliva, right? If this was a dairy cow that belonged to the Yid, and now the guy went ahead and milked it, well, that milk is going to be muktzah. Why is that milk muktzah? Very simple why the milk is muktzah. The milk is muktzah because the Yid wasn't allowed to go ahead and milk that cow. For the Yid to milk that cow would be the Isser of Mefarik, right? And we said, according to most Rishonim, that's the Isser of Mefarik, not according to the Bach that we saw on the previous page. But according to the Mechaber, to milk that cow is the Isser of Mefarik. So if a guy went ahead and a guy milked the cow, that milk is going to be Asr. That milk is muktzah. The das of the Yid was not on that milk. And we have another chiddush over here, which the Mishnah Berurah is going to spell out very soon. The chiddush of the Ramah over here is, if the Yid has a behema that's a medes la'achila, if the Yid has a cow that's omed l'shchita, and now the Yid himself is allowed to go ahead and milk that cow, if he does it into a bucket that has food in it. That's the halacha of the mechaber that we just saw before. There's no mefarik problem. And if he milks it into food, there's no noilid problem because it was a Michael and it is a Michael. The chiddush over here is that if a non-Jew takes a Yid's cow that's omed l'shchita, he could milk it even into an empty bucket. And the Yid's allowed to use it. Now you'll ask me, why is that true? Why isn't there a noilid problem? So we'll discuss that soon in the Mishnah Berurah. But that's what the Mishnah Berurah means over here in Ois Kat and Ches. He says this, that the Ramah says that if a non-Jew goes ahead and milks an animal on Yom Tov, you could be mekel. What he means that you could be mekel is, he means even if the non-Jew goes ahead and milks it into an empty bucket, you still could be mekel. Hainu by medes la'achila. We're talking about a Yid's animal that is a medes la'achila. If it's a medes la'chaliva, then like I said, it's a muktzah. Then that milk is muktzah, all bets are off. But if it's a Yid's animal that's a medes la'achila, and the Nachri goes ahead and milks it into an empty bucket, you could still be Mekel. That's case number one that you could say that the Ramah is talking about here. Oy, says the Mishnah Berurah, Oy shechaylev behema shaloi, or you could say that the Ramah is talking about a case where a non-Jew goes ahead and milks his own animal. The less baby shomuktzah. Then you could use that milk. If you watched a non-Jew milk his own animal on Yom Tov, you could use that milk, because why not? The less baby shomuktzah, there's no problem of muktzah here. What kind of muktzah? A guy's property can never become muktzah. A guy doesn't have an isser on Yom Tov. So for the guy, everything is muchan. For the guy, he doesn't look at his cow and say, oh, it depends. What kind of cow is this? Is it Omedes l'shchita? Is it Omedes l'chaliva? Maybe the milk is also, maybe the milk is mutter. No, to a guy, it's all mutter. So everything is muchan to the guy. And since it's muchan for the guy, it's muchan for us. So, in Shin Yud al Chashavas, it's explained over there that the property of a guy, there is no muktzah. And by a guy's animal, even if it is a dairy cow, there's no difference. By a guy's animal, by a non-Jew's animal, there's no difference if it's Omedes l'chaliva or it's Omedes l'achila. It's all the same. It's considered muchan for everything. And we're going to see that the point over here is that we don't categorize a non-Jew's animal. By a Yid's animal, we have to categorize it. By a Yid's animal, we look at a Yid's animal. It depends. A Yid's animal is a Omedes l'chaliva. Well, then that means that the Yid has a das on this animal, that this animal is a dairy cow. If a Yid owns an animal and his das is that it's a dairy cow, then it changes the halachic status of the animal. Now that animal is not a Michael. It's a dairy cow. And therefore, if you milk it, you're extracting a Michael from a non-Michael. You're being over on the malacha of mefarek. Also, you have a muktzah problem. Before it was one item, and now it had a status change. It's another item. You have a noilud problem. But if it's a non-Jew's cow, none of these things apply. We don't categorize a non-Jew's animal based on his das. His das is koloi nechshav. His das is garnish vert. When we don't rechen sich with his das. We don't worry about his das. So we don't categorize his animal according to his das. And this is going to be spelled out more clearly in the coming Mishnah Berurahs. First, let's do ice test. V'Yisrael rayehu. Of course, the whole heter of using the milk that a non-Jew milked is going to be totally, it's going to be dependent on the fact that a Yid watched the milking. If the Yid didn't see the milking, Asr Yisrael Olam, that milk is going to be totally forbidden to the Yid, Lishtoisam to drink it, Kidi Isa B'Yaradea, Siman Kuf Tezvav Sef Aleph, because it's going to be Chalav Nachri. It's not Chalav Yisrael, you're not allowed to drink it. Ice Cotton Yud, Yesh Lahakil. So the Ramah said, you have the non-Jew did the milking, and again we have these two different possibilities. Either he milked the animal of a Yid that was a Medes l'shchita, so he milked the animal of a Yid that was a Michael cow, it was a Medes l'achila. Even if he milked it into an empty bucket, it's still mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Yesh Lahakil, Hainu afilu im chalavai liktera reikonis. Even if the non-Jew went ahead and he milked the cow into an empty bucket, it's still mutter. The loy mikri noilad, because there is no noilad here. Why is there no noilad? Again, this Yid has a cow. It's a cow that's a Medes l'shchita. It's a cow that he intends on eating. And therefore, this cow has the halachic status of a Michael. If the Yid himself wants to milk this cow on Yom Tov, can he? Yes, he can. All he has to do is he has to fill up a bucket with food and he has to milk it straight into the bucket. So there's no mefarek problem and there's no noilad problem because it was a Michael and it is a Michael. So the Yid looks at this milk as being available to him for use on Yom Tov. It's muchan because he has the ability to milk this cow. Now, if the non-Jew comes, even if the non-Jew milks the cow into an empty bucket, the milk is still mutter. And there's no noilad problem, says the Mishnah Berurah. He says the loy mikri noilad. It's not called noilad. Because the Yid had the ability to milk this cow into a bucket that has food in it, so there wouldn't be a noilad problem. And therefore, this milk is muchan. So you understand this? I hope it's coming across to you how fascinating this is. The Yid has a cow that's a Michael. It's a cow that's a medus l'shchita, so it's a Michael. If he milks it into an empty bucket, the milk is aser because it's noilad. Because while the milk was in the animal, it was a Michael. Now it's in the bucket, in the empty bucket. It's a beverage, it's a mashke, it's noilad. If the Yid milks it into a bucket that has food in it, it's mutter. Because it's not mefarik, it's a Michael from a Michael, and there's no noilad. It was a Michael, and it is a Michael. Now the non-Jew comes ahead. The non-Jew, even if he milks it into an empty bucket, the Yid is allowed to drink it. Why isn't it noilad? Why don't you look at it and say, hey, it's noilad? If I would have milked the cow, it would be noilad. You would tell me it's aser. Before it was a Michael, now it's a mashke. But if the guy goes ahead and milks it, it's not aser mishum noilad. Why? So the Sharitzian, the Chavetz Chaim, struggles with this, and Sharitzian always cut ches. He says, I don't understand it. Why isn't it noilad? And he doesn't have a satisfactory explanation. But it seems, from the Mefarshim, it seems that the pshat over here is, since that milk is muchan for the Yid, since the Yid has a way to get at that milk, now the Yid could close his eyes to what the non-Jew does. It's not negated to me to what the non-Jew did. The non-Jew milked it into an empty bucket. Somehow I don't have to reckon with that, with the fact that he milked it into an empty bucket. I don't have to worry about that. It was muchan for me. It's muchan for me. I'm allowed to use it. That's not the last fascinating thing that we're going to see over here. Let's push on weiter. The Beis Meir Kasav, the Beis Meir writes, the Beis Meir doesn't like this. He says, no, this is only mutter if the non-Jew milks it into a bucket that has food in it, because otherwise it is noilad. So then what's the chiddush of the Ramah? So the Beis Meir says that the only chiddush of the Ramah is the second case that we mentioned that the Ramah could be talking about. That if a guy milks his own cow, that's mutter afilu ba'imedus lachaliva, even if it's a cow that it's a medus, even if it's a dairy cow. If the guy goes ahead and milks it, I'm allowed to use the milk that he milked, even if he milked it from a dairy cow. Why? Why don't you say it's muktzah? No, it's not muktzah. They ain't muktzah b'shalakum the chanal, because since it belongs to a non-Jew, there's no such thing as muktzah. Now let's continue. Let's go back to the top line here in the Ramah. Says the Ramah, ach nahagu by iser. Even though I just told you that you could be makel in these two cases, the Ramah says ach nahagu by iser. We're accustomed to be noig iser, and we don't use the milk that was milked by the non-Jew. Ve'ein l'shanois, and you should not change from this minute. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yod Aleph. Ach nahagu by iser. We are accustomed to ruling stringently. Hainu explains the Chavetz Chaim what cases the Ramah talking about where we're machmer. Hainu de bekidera reikonis. If the non-Jew is milking the animal into an empty bucket, aser afla akum hachaylev. This is aser even if the non-Jew does the milking. Avalem uchaylev l'saych eichlin. But if the non-Jew milks the animal into a bucket that has food in it, mebehema shaloi, from his own animal, afim hiamedus lachaliva, even if it's an animal that's a medus lachaliva, shari v'chanal b'siv cotton ches. So the Ramah is telling you which case are we noyeg iser. With noyeg iser, if a yid has a behema that's a medus l'shchita, and now a non-Jew comes and he milks that animal into an empty bucket. So on that, the Ramah says we're noyeg iser, I guess, because of noilud. There's a noilud problem. But let's say the non-Jew takes his own behema and he milks it into a bucket that has food in it, then it's mutter. There's no noilud. Even if it's his own dairy cow, even if the non-Jew is milking his own dairy cow, but he milks it into a bucket that has food in it, it's mutter. Why shouldn't it be mutter? We're not worried about his mefarik, and there's no noilud, so it's mutter. But now get this. The chain, and similarly, Yisrael mutter lachloiv, a yid is allowed to milk Mibehemas akum, from the animal of a non-Jew, afilu medes lechaliva, even if it's a dairy cow. Lesoich eichlin, if he does it into a bucket that has food in it, de'ein muktzah b'shalakum, because there's no muktzah on the property of a goy, the chanal, and like we saw previously. Now let's get what I just said over here. We said all the way in the beginning of the Siman, the very first thing that we said in the Hakdama is that to milk a dairy cow is the malacha of mefarik. Except, right? Everybody agreed on that. Well, not everybody. We said the Bach disagrees. The Bach holds that there's no mefarik. The mefarik is mutal l'tzarech echel nefesh. But the mechaber, everything that we're working here, says the Chavetz Chaim right away in the beginning of the Siman, to milk a dairy cow is the malacha of mefarik. You're extracting a meichel from a non-meichel. The dairy cow is not a meichel, and you're extracting milk from it. That's the halacha of mefarik. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, if a non-Jew has a dairy cow, a Yid is allowed to go ahead and milk that cow on Yom Tov if he milks it into a bucket that has food in it. Why? What happened to mefarik? He's extracting a meichel from a non-meichel. He's extracting milk, a meichel, from a dairy cow, which is not a meichel. Why is it mefarik? And the answer, it seems to be, is that since the cow belongs to a non-Jew, we do not categorize the cow. The das of the non-Jewish owner does not have the power to halachically categorize his animal as anything. Very nice that this non-Jew has a cow and he decided that it's a dairy cow. His deciding that this cow is a dairy cow, even though he's the owner of the cow, does not have any halachic significance. The property of a non-Jew is considered mukhan for him for anything. His das doesn't have that ability to categorize it, Michael, not Michael. Therefore, it's so fascinating. If the Yid would milk his own dairy cow, it's mefarik. But if he milks a goy's dairy cow, it's not mefarik. Okay, I was hoping to get a little bit further, but I think we're going to stop over here. The rest of the Siman is very simple and should go very quickly. So I'm willing to say that we picked up another day on the Dirshu schedule. I think after this, I'm not sure if 1 or 2 days behind, but I intend on catching up in short order. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be megan on ganz Klal Yisrael. Say here, say in Eretz Yisrael, b'chama kaimei shehem. Anybody who needs Yeshuas and Refuas, the Rabban Shem should send Yeshuas and Refuas and Parnasa and Gesund. Rabban Shem should take care of everyone, and we should be zeicher to see the B'Yisrael Tzedek. Be well.